Starting a new study, and this new study is called Restless Wanderer. And I have to tell you, I know I'm a bad speller, but sometimes I need a reminder how bad I am. My wife usually corrects me on a lot of things that I spell wrong at home, or my kids. And so I gave the notes to Danica this week, and I had Restless Wanderer, and I spelled it W-R-E-S-T, and she's like, we're going to do that with an R instead of the W. So I thought the W would fit better with the WW and the thing, but oh well. So anyways, we're starting this new series, and what it's about is it's the time that the Israelites, it's the time that they were going to go in the promised land, but because of their lack of faith, there was this period of 40 years that they're wandering in the wilderness. And so we're going to look at that today. And so we're going to start out with some of that. Before we get into the whole thing, though, we're going to be in Numbers chapter 13, verses 17 we're starting at. And then we're going to go into chapter 14, 11. The first passage I'll read, though, today is B14, 1 through 4. When I was doing my research on this and was looking some things up, one of the things I came to was this scientific study that was done, and it talks about the law of the pendulum. And if you know what a pendulum is, it's, you put some kind of ball or thing on this string, and when you let it go, it just sort of swings back and forth. The law of the pendulum basically is this. It's wherever you start the swinging motion, it will never come back to the original place it started. It'll always just drop a little bit short. Okay, because of the friction and the gravity and the whole thing, it always drops short. So a kid in a class in college, they're kids to me now, by the way. Okay, so I guess they're young adults. But he was doing a speech, and he wanted to do a sort of dramatic presentation of this law. And so in front of his class and his professor, he decided to take a piece of string, put a pendulum on it, and then he thumbtacked it to the chalkboard on the top. And he dropped the thing, and what he did is he started from the dropping part, put a little mark, and then every time it came back, he did another mark, and you could see it progressively getting shorter and shorter, never sort of hitting that same mark again. So as he was showing this, and as he was explaining the law of the pendulum, he asked the whole class and afterwards, how many of you believe in the law of the pendulum? And everybody was like, yes, we believe in it, because we've seen it with our own eyes, we've heard the explanation, and that's the way it works. His professor then got up and was coming to the front, and he says, Professor, do you believe in that as well? Because the professor thought he was done, and he says, yes, I definitely believe in this theory. And so he said, well, Professor, would you sit down in this chair? And so he sat down in this chair, and on the steel beams of the ceiling, he had another pendulum with a 250-pound ball on it. And he asked the professor to sit right here, so the professor sat there, and he took the ball, and he released it by his face. And so the pendulum swung all this way, and as it was coming back to the professor decided to get up and hide underneath the table. All right? And so then the student asked, he says, does our professor believe in the law of the pendulum? And everyone's like, no, because he had gotten up. And I thought about this, and I thought about in life, how many times we have certain theories in life, and then all of a sudden, when that sort of 250-pound pressure comes our way, we tend to hide or get out. So if I said to most of you, do you believe in marriage? Do you believe that when you took your vows in front of somebody that it was forever? And the optimist in us says, yes, that's what we believe in. And even some of you say, yeah, we know that everything's not perfect, but you have to work at it in marriage. But when that 250-pound problem comes your way, a lot of us tend to get out. I think there's the thing where we say to ourselves, we want kids, and we believe that our kids will be successful and do the right things and make the right decisions, and we think we can parent them, and then all of a sudden, and we love these kids, and all of a sudden, that 250-pound situation that they cause that is embarrassing to you in some way or another, it starts coming your way, and that love you have for your kids, even though it's still there, you're kind of okay, but I didn't sign up for this, because you're afraid of how that's going to smack you down. And I think that honestly, in the faith, when we say that we believe in God, I truly think that we mean that. When we recognize the difference that he's made in our life and the difference that he can make in other people's lives, and we've seen the things that he's done, like all of us would reconcile with that and say, yeah, we believe in God. We believe that he's all powerful. We believe that he can take care of every situation in our life. But then all of a sudden that 250-pound problem comes, and you and I are ready to hide, are ready to get out, and we're just kind of done with the things of God. And we get in this passage today, we're going to start at the place where the Israelites, who have already seen the miracles of God and had this faith in God, we're going to see them come to this place when they're in a 250-pound situation coming their way. And I want you to watch the response to it. So let's read together in Numbers 14, verses 1 through 4. It says, that night all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So let's pray together. Father, when I read a passage like this, there's part of me that, knows the story and knows what you brought them through, and I can't help but consider, Lord, if they saw you do those huge miracles, what brought them to the place where they didn't think that you would continue to do what you said you were going to do? And I'll look at that and say how shameful, how stupid, how crazy that is, that now they're saying, I want to go back to the place I was just freed from. But the truth is, Lord, I think that all of us, I know I can, identify in those situations where I do have this faith in you, but the moment that situation comes, the one that seems to be bigger than what I can handle, I'm prone to leave or to give up. And the truth is, you want us to stay in it. And so, Father, I pray that today that all of us will wrestle with our faith, that we'll wrestle with, how big do we truly think God is. I pray that as I get in the text today, if there's anything that I would get wrong, I pray that you would clean it up in the ears of your people so that your voice is the one they hear, not mine. In your name we pray. Amen. So before we get into this whole passage, I want to start out by giving you a little background on the story that kind of what brought them to this point. Some of you will know the story. Some of you, this will be the first time you've ever heard it. But basically what happened is there were the people of God, the Israelites, or we call them Hebrews, it's what we know as Jews. They had this relationship with God. There was a famine that was in the land at one time, and you remember that God raised up Joseph. Joseph took care of a lot of what was taking place with the famine. He brought the Israelites, or his family, he brought them to Egypt, and Joseph was very high as far as Pharaoh was concerned, okay? He was almost on equal footing. So Joseph and his people were there, and then what happened is enough time had passed that people forgot who Joseph was. And not only that, but the Israelites, or the Hebrews, they were growing so vast in number that the Egyptians felt like that they could be overtaken by this people at some point, and they might raise up their own leader. So Pharaoh, being afraid of sort of the situation, he decided that we're going to put these people in bondage, and not only are we going to enslave them, but we're going to kill the firstborn sons or children, and we're going to do away with them. And we know the miracle of this story, that God allowed this one child to be spared, and his name was Moses. And matter of fact, Moses was put in a basket. He was found by Pharaoh's daughter, and so basically brought up in sort of this royalty. And then we read later that Moses knew where he came from. He knew who his true people were. And as the people of Israel were enslaved, there was a guard who was beating on one of the Hebrews. And Moses had enough, because he was like, well, these are my people. Why are we treating them so badly? And so he ended up killing this guy. And as a result, some of the other Hebrews noticed, and it felt like he was going to be told on. And so Moses ran away. And then here's what we know. Moses ran away, and he comes to this place eventually after been serving in his father-in-law's house for a while. All of a sudden, he goes out, and he's in the wilderness. He's on this mountain, and he was on this mountain. There is this bush that is on fire. And the fire is on the bush, but it's not consuming the bush. And so Moses goes there, and in that presence, he hears the voice of God. And God tells him, you're standing on holy ground, to which he takes his shoes off, and he stands there on that holy ground. And then God says to him, and I want you to catch this, he says, I've heard the cries of my people. And then he says, here's what I want you to do. Oh, that was good timing. I was like, what are we laughing at? I was like, that was, thank you. Yeah, that was awesome. Where do I go from there? Okay. So here's the cries of the people. All right. We only get it to work once. But anyway, so here's the cries of the people. And I love this passage because what it's saying is this, is that the people of God felt so enslaved and they felt burdened with what was going on that they began to cry out to God, and God heard them. And that's important for you and I to understand. Because in this world, when we realize there's situations that are beyond our control, when we realize that things aren't going the way that we want, you and I need to understand that there is an importance to crying out to God. And not only is there importance in crying out to him, but he hears you. And what I think is today, I think we're living in a world where we don't cry out like we once did. And what I mean by that is we do a lot of complaining, but we never take it to God. So we talk about how the politics in this land is messed up. We talk about things in our school, how they're messed up. We talk about how in our marriages and our families, like there are situations that are messed up. But you and I just sit there in that complaining mode and we never take it to God. Like what would happen if you and I started crying out for the politics of our land? What would happen if you and I started crying out for our schools and what's going on in them? What would happen if you and I in our marriages would cry out to God and say, God, I don't know how to do this. I need you to help. What would happen? Because it says that God hears our cries. And then he steps into that situation. But if you and I don't cry out, God may never step in. So there is an importance to us crying out. And so it says this then, so God told Moses, he said, Moses, you're going to be the leader and I want you to go free these people. And he's like, I can't do that. I don't speak well. And so we know that he sends his brother Aaron with him, who seems to be a better speaker at the time. And because Moses, we think maybe have a stuttering problem or something that he was embarrassed about. And he didn't want to get out there and do it. But God calls him, he says, look, I want you to go to Pharaoh and I want you to require that he lets the people go. Well, that's easier said than done. But Moses already seen God do some miracles right there. Remember, he picked up the staff and he said, lay down the staff, and it turned into a snake. He said, pick it up, and it turned back into a staff. So Moses saw the power and the authority of God. So when God tells him to go do something underneath that authority and power, he says, okay, I'll do it. And so we know that he goes to Pharaoh and he tells Pharaoh, hey, Pharaoh, like if you don't let the people go, God's going to show you his power in this way. And there happens to be, and we're not going to go over all of them, but there happens to be 10 different plagues. And those plagues are kind of crazy. We know that once he turns the rivers to blood. We know that he sends swarms of locusts and some other animals. We know they get boils at times. So there's all these situations happening. And every time that they happen, one by one, Pharaoh calls Moses back and he says, if you pray that these will end, I will let your people go. They end it, and then guess what? Pharaoh goes back against it again. He says, nope, this is what's going to happen. It's not until, listen to this, 9 different plagues happen. 9 different times this same situation happens, and Pharaoh keeps sort of reneging on the whole thing, and then all of a sudden he goes back, right? And he has this last moment. And what is said is this. He says, if you don't let the people go, then every firstborn male son will die, including the animals, if you don't put the blood on the arches. And we know that there was great wailing within Egypt that night as different ones died. And as Pharaoh's own son died, he calls Moses back and he says, done. Give up. Take the people and go. So Moses takes the people of Israel and he leaves Egypt. And as they're leaving, though, Pharaoh sort of has this change of heart again and probably aggravated and upset and decides, I want to take these people. Like, we're losing all of our help. Let's go get them back. And anybody that wants to come with us, we'll kill them. And so it says that he sends his whole army after them. And Moses and the people see this happening. And they get to the Red Sea. And you sort of have this Charlton Heston scene, remember? Okay? And I'm aging myself. I know that at this point. Okay? But he has this Moses scene. And Moses standing out there in the river with his staff. And he puts it down. And we read that the Red Sea parts. And that they go through it as this army's coming down upon them. All the people of Israel get to the other side. And as Pharaoh's army gets in that Red Sea that is now dry, it says that the rivers come back on them and kill Pharaoh and his army. They see the might and the power of God in that situation. And then this is what God says to him. After all these miracles that he does one by one, they see the 10 plagues, they see this river parted, and then all of a sudden he says, I'm going to take you and I'm going to give you a land that I've promised you. And that's really, really powerful. Because he said, this is what I'm going to offer you. And church, I just want to make a side note for a moment. But there is a promised land that God wanted to give them, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But I want you to know this. God has promised you and I a land as well. He has promised us heaven at some point. When Jesus left this earth, he said, I go and I prepare a place for you. And he's been doing that for over 2,000 years. Now, if you and I believe biblically that this world was created in 6 days, and he says, I've been preparing a place for you for 2,000 years, that place is going to be awesome, right? Okay? So he's preparing a place for you and I. So as a result, they're coming into what we believe is called the promised land. And as they're standing there, here's what you need to know that happens. Moses has heard from God, like, I'm going to give this land to you. And he reported that to the people. But what Moses does is Moses chooses 12 men. One from each tribe. So there's 12 tribes of Israel. So they chose one man from each tribe, and they were supposed to go in. And here's the command that Moses gives them in verses chapter 13, 17 through 33. It says, when Moses sent them, talking about these men, to explore Canaan, he said, go up to the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob toward Lebo Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai and the descendants of Anak lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with the same pomegranates and figs. They placed what was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. By the way, I forgot to mention this first service. That 40 days that they explored is actually significant. And the reason why, because we know that in the wilderness later, they're in there for 40 years, one for each day that they explored the land. All right, so what I want you to understand about this is God had told Moses, like, we're going to give you this land. And what Moses did is he took 12 people and he sent them to the land to kind of evaluate things. Here's what I want you to know. You and I all, in any area of our life, should always be willing to make observations, okay? Because even though we have a belief in God, and when God calls us to do something, we still believe, God has still given you your senses in order to make some observations. And God wants you to use those senses to make observations. It says they went into the land, they saw all the fruit, and they saw all that was going on. It says, I want you to bring back a report of what you are seeing. God said, I'm going to give you this land, but go ahead and make some observations, because as you're making observations, then those observations help us in order to know how we should respond to what's going on. You know, listen, if you and I broke everything down in life, like, it would be important for us to make some observations, right? Like, I think even before, and I use marriage a lot, but before you go into marriage, there's some observations you need to make. You need to decide what marriage is going to be like. Are you going to be in it forever? Or have you seen some good marriages around you? Have you seen some bad marriages? What made some of those marriages good? What made some of those bad? You need to look at, before you get a job, there's some evaluation you need to do. What's my pay going to be like? What's it like working in this situation? Who are the people I'm going to be around? Can I handle this situation? Like, those are observations that you and I need to make. And God has given us that ability to do that. And then as we gain and we have those observations, it allows us to bring back a report and decide what to do from there. So we get into verses 26 through 29, and it says, they came back to Moses and Aaron, then the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. here is its fruit. So already they're bringing back a good report. What God said is true. There is all this good vegetation. There's this good fruit. It's flowing milk and honey, just like God said. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Now listen, they were doing everything that they were asked to do, right? They would report back what they saw, both the good and the bad. I want to know, are the cities fortified? I want to know, are the people big? And I want to know if there are many. So they're reporting all those things back. So I want you to understand that this is that when you and I are making observations, we need to look at the potential for both good and the potential for bad. And I want you to hear that word, the potential. Because if God has called you something, you and I need to understand that He's going to take care of it. So you need to make some decisions on what things are going well. And by the way, I think that's good for all of us to do. And again, even if I was to look at my marriage, like there are some observations I need to make about my marriage, right? Like, here are the things that are going well. My wife is beautiful. She's sticking around, all right? She cooks well, all right? Like, she still laughs at some of my jokes, all right? So those are great observations. She is a mother to 5 kids. You know, she's doing a lot for them. Like, those are great observations, and they're good. Like, these are the things that do well. You know, we do devotions. We love each other. We make sure to still give each other a kiss, and we don't make weird faces. All right? Like, we still like looking at each other. All right? Unless she's a great actress. I don't know. Okay? But then there are some bad things in that marriage as well. And luckily my wife's not here, so I can be more honest this service, okay? No. But there are some times that she and I have to look at what is not working. I know that when my wife doesn't get enough sleep, she can be a little bit angry, right? And why is she not getting enough sleep? Because I'm snoring. Why am I snoring? Because I eat too much. All right? Those are potential for bad, right? But there are things that can be fixed. So how do I make sure that she has a more restful sleep? And there's some work that needs to be done, right? You need to lose some weight, need to either get her some big earplugs or put some other noise or whatever, you know? Like, we've got to figure a way out so that she can have the appropriate amount of rest. There are some times when we get so busy doing the kids' things that we can miss the potential time for us together, to talk, to communicate, to have a date. So what do we need to do? Because if we live in that world, there's a potential for really bad things to happen. You know, there are some evaluations that we need to do in our jobs from time to time. Like, these are the things that are going well. The people, for the most part, I work with, it's going good. Like, I'm getting a paycheck, I'm getting these things. But then you might make some other observations. You might say, yeah, but I'm spending too much time, or we don't have the equipment we need. And we make observations, and then we're able to speak in those observations because these are the potential for bad. And listen to this. You and I, even in choosing a church, we need to make some observations about the churches that we're in. And we need to decide, like, is the good, are they preaching the Word of God? Because if not, there's major problems. We need to look and start making decisions like, what is the church about? Do they only care about making a name for themselves or making a name for Christ? You know, what good things are happening? I have to tell you, and I explained this earlier in first service, but there were some things that I think God has called us into, and I have to tell you, each and every time we took a step in, like, you're worried, is this going to work out? You know, like, so for example, when we first hired Pastor Mike to do sports ministries at the church, we were going to have to provide for that salary, right? So how are we going to do this? Well, the good news is God continued to provide the money. Through DCS, we were able to pay his salary. And not only that, but they have 450 kids in that program this year. 450 kids for the next several weeks, 8 to 10 weeks, are going to be given devotionals. outside of a normal Sunday service. That's pretty cool, right? But we had to walk into what God called us to do. When we hired Pastor Jerry, again, we knew we needed somebody for care. We didn't know if we had the money. We decided to do it. And here's the thing. He was able to step into some choir things we needed. He started what we call hymn sing, which I have to laugh about this, by the way, because I was meeting with a group of my pastors, and they're all a little bit younger, and they have some big, they have some good sized church situations. And I said, yeah, we're getting ready to start a hymn sing. And they're like, a hymn sing? Why would you do that? And I was like, I think it's what we need for our community and the people. I think they'll love it. And they said, so then they asked, next time I came back, they said, so how many people it's in your hymn sing? And I said, 100. And they're like, 100? Well, guess what they added to their program? A hymn sing. All right? So you realize those things pay for itself. We knew that we needed to step out, or felt like God was calling us more into missions. So we partnered with Pastor Wayne, who was here first service, and we said, hey, Pastor Wayne, would you consider coming on with us part-time to do missions? And I have to tell you, we picked him up in a lot of other areas, including teaching. But here's the cool thing. It took 40 kids, teens this year, on a missions trip. They have another trip planned to Nicaragua. And if you want to go on another trip to Nicaragua in March, we have another missions trip going on that you can even sign up for, get information about today. But you can sign up for that. We're going there again. And we've raised up 3 new missionaries in this church. And what you don't understand is this. In the mission field, they have what they call the 1040 window, which means this is the place that is least evangelized. And where we just sent one of them, getting ready to send 2, are in that area. You see, because we were faithful to step into those things, God has continued to do more and more because we're going to step in. Then I'm just going to do a little bragging. They don't know I'm going to do this right now, but I want to brag on Ashley and Evan there in their group, because here's the cool thing. Ashley came to us a while ago and said, hey, I feel like we want to start this revival service in the park at Lincoln. And so she said, hey, we're going to get some other churches. She said, we're going to run this thing. Can you help us out in a couple areas, and can you come and speak at it? And I said, sure. Well, they had their first thing. And I don't know how many people ended up being there, but I know at the time when I was there was at least 50, and I'm sure there were people in and out. But here's what I love about that. We used to go out in the park and do that, but we never preached at it. She thought we should preach at it. So she called a bunch of different pastors and a bunch of different people, and she asked if we would preach at it. I went there and spoke for a while. And man, it was one of the most rewarding things, but I have to be honest, the thing that was more rewarding, they had some person up there and they said, hey, anybody have anxiety, need to pray about it, come on down. They started praying with people in Lincoln Park in the middle of the day at that thing. All because this girl had a vision from God. God said, I want you to step into this. And she stepped into it and brought other people along. And I'm telling you, it was some of the most authentic stuff that I've ever seen. And I want you to know, church, that God has called us to be a church that will reach the lost. And so I want to move through this because I am running out of time. We want to do time of communion today. But what's interesting to me is as they're making this report, what's beginning to happen, instead of focusing on everything that is good and focusing on who God is, all of a sudden they start focusing on all the bad things. Like, these guys are too big, there's too many of an army. And this, I love my man Caleb, by the way, because here's what Caleb does. Caleb's kind of had enough. And this is his big moment. And Caleb says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses. And I don't know what he did. My thing would have been probably like, okay, shut up. I'm tired of hearing all this negative stuff. Like, we need to refocus. And here's what Caleb said. Caleb's like, look, I know what everybody else is saying, but we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And I love that about Caleb, because Caleb wasn't focusing on how big the problem was. Caleb was focusing on how big God is. And you and I have got to come to the place where we ask the question, how big is our God compared to how big our problem is? And if you believe that God is all powerful, then there is not a problem that's too big for him. So as if he's called us to step into that, like he has something at the end of that he wants to give us. And you and I have got to step into that very thing. So we get in there to verses 31 through chapter 14, verse 4. And it says, but then the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report, They started gossiping that we can't do this about the land they had explored. So all the good stuff, they were finally taken away. They said the land we explored devours those living in it. So now they're giving a false report. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And then we have that passage that we first read about, where the people are like, then let's go back. You see, here's what I want you to know. How you see something determines how you respond. So in other words, what you put in your faith in is going to determine how you respond. How big you see God is how you will respond to a problem. So if some of you look at your marriage and you look at only the problems, then your marriage will be over. But if you look at your marriage and you start to see the good and you start to see how God can reconcile that thing, then God will show you. If you go out there and you look at your job and you think, man, it's just the same old thing, I'm never going to get through this, and all you see is all the problems, then you might as well quit. But if you can see the way that God can step in and help you, then God will step in and do that. And here's the thing, if you believe that God loved you, then you would know the value that you are to him. But if you see God as just this condemning person who can't wait for you to make the first mistake and so he can zap you, then you'll have a terrible time finding the grace of God. What's crazy is this. Because of their situation, because of what they saw, they thought it would be better for them to go back into slavery than to experience the freedom and experience the grace that God had for them. And church, I have to be honest, I've seen this done time and time again. I've seen people freed in their marriages. I've seen people freed from their addictions. But the next time that 250-pound problem comes, they give up on their marriage, or some of them turn back to addictions because for some reason they thought that was a better place to be. And the truth is, they're missing the grace of God. It basically goes in this passage and it talks about Moses and Aaron. They fall down with their face to the ground and they're tearing their clothes. They're upset about what's going on, and they're kind of pleading with the people. And what the people decide is they're like, you know what? Maybe we need new leadership. Maybe we need to go back the way that we came. And then we have this response from God. And it says this, then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of the meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed for them? You see, God did miracle and miracle for them again, and he said, this is what I want to give you. And the truth is, they missed out. Why? Because of their lack of faith in God. What would they have gained if they would have believed? They would have experienced the promised land right away. Instead, God says, for 40 years, you'll wander. That's 1 year for each day that they explored the land and came to their conclusion. You know, there was this story about 2 kids that were playing on a hillside, and the hour was getting late, and they noticed the sun was setting. And as the sun was setting, the one boy made the observation. He's like, man, what's crazy is we're standing here still on the earth, and the sun just keeps moving. He says, you see it move over there. It started out here in the trees, and now it's way down over here. They're like, that's crazy. We're standing still, and this thing's moving around. And the other boy said, oh, that's not what Dad said. Dad said the earth revolves around the sun. And so what you're seeing is not correct. And the boy said this, all I know is what I see. And the other boy said, all I know is what my father told me. You and I have got to understand that if God calls us in to do something, God's going to be there, and he's going to see it through. I thought there was a powerful song that we sang today, and I couldn't help but just tear up during it. And it's this whole idea that I'm fighting a battle that he's already won. So if God calls us into something, if he calls you in to fix your marriage, if he calls you in to fix your job situation, if he calls you in to just have a relationship with you, like it's a battle that he's already won. He did something on the cross that was powerful. And no matter what mistake you've made, you can be forgiven for that.